Like Adolf said, we always have a way where we start getting into these projects like this. And over the years, I think anybody who's ever had an interest in reptiles has kind of looked at Galapagos tortoises and wondered what an amazing animal. And we all follow their evolutionary history in the Galapagos and their exploitations, their extinctions, and so forth. But there's a lot of them in captivity that are doing well, and there's some that are not doing so well. One of the problems is that people that have them, including zoos, are not having very much success breeding them for whatever reasons, and we don't really understand that, whether there's different subspecies involved, the diet's wrong, the housing's wrong, the footing's wrong, whatever it is, but something's not working. I do have a client in Phoenix now who just hatched his 100th baby Galapagos tortoise, which is pretty amazing. He's doing something right. The only problem with that is the guy who owns the male is just getting divorced from his wife, and there's a fight over where the male's going to go. So it just, sex is just craziness, even with the Galapagos tortoises and their owners. So what happened with this one is I have this friend of mine who's a client named Wendy. She's my co-author. She has Galapagos tortoises. I also have Galapagos tortoises. And she got wondering what she could do to figure out what we might figure out is going on with these Galapagos tortoises that had these swellings. And I think you've all noticed that certain Galapagos tortoises seem to have big neck swellings or limb swellings or both. They can be constant in some animals. They can be present in some animals when the rest of the animals in the herd don't have that. Some animals, they come and go. It's a pretty amazing thing. It may not all be the same thing, but a number of things have been hypothesized as to what causes that, where diet, thyroid problems, thymus problems, iodine deficiencies, mineral deficiencies, and so forth. So what I'm going to show you is a little video that she put together showing some of these animals with swellings. And I just want you to look at the amazing abnormalities they have and the differences in them. Oops, here we go. Where do we have to punch? Is this supposed to work? Nothing's happening. Okay. My advance is not advancing. He's going to play it over there. These are all adult Galapagos tortoises, and about 2/3 of them are dead now. Please bear with us. I hope Donald Trump didn't get hold of that. Doug was asking about how to get blood in these big guys. I actually have a picture that shows that. What we typically do with these guys, we don't sedate them, of course, because nobody wants to sedate their big expensive Galapagos tortoise. So we roll them on their sides or upside down, and I try and use the tail vein, the dorsal tail vein, as much as possible. You will not get a jugular stick on a galop very easily if he doesn't want you to. If he pulls the head, and it's worse than a sulcata. We also use the brachial vein, so most of ours came from tail veins, dorsal tail veins. It's easier in a female because they have a big tail. Males have a little bitty tail. One of the problems we have is when they roll their tail, you've got the tail in your hands, and when they roll their tail to one side, the orientation of the vertebrae also changes. So you think you're in the midline, 2 seconds later you're not on the midline and you miss it. So there are some references in your proceedings that talk about thyroid values and what's going on in Galapagos tortoises. Tom Boyer, who I think is still, Tom's there. I can barely see with the light, but Tom did a very nice review article on thyroid, what's known about thyroid substance and testing and structures in tortoises and in reptiles in general. Basically, thyroid values in reptiles where they've been reported are about 25% of those reported in mammals, and hypothyroidism has not been reported in crocodilians and snakes at that time, unless it's changed. Has it changed since then, Tom? Still hasn't, okay. These 3 papers here have all addressed these issues in Galapagos tortoises in the past. So in the US, there's estimated to be somewhere around 200 adult Galapagos tortoises in captivity. That includes zoo animals. It's very difficult to get the zoos to cooperate. They have to go through their own research protocols to get blood samples to you, or for you, or with you. So it doesn't usually work. The IUCN considers them to be a species that's critically endangered if it's got less than 250 animals in a population. So if you consider the US population to be under 200, that's a critically endangered animal in the US unless we get a lot more of them. And one of the problems we're seeing is that a great number of these are dying before the age of 15 or 20, various problems. So they're getting bigger faster than they do in the wild, and they're dying. I just necropsied a 15-year-old animal that was 24 inches long, carapace straight length, with active follicles in her ovaries. Way, way too big, way too early, and she's dead. Okay? So they are, in one sense, critically endangered. It's taken a lot of lives. Necropsies are hard to get from people. A lot of people have their animals die and don't do necropsies. Some of the zoos that had necropsies done don't really want to share them with you because they're afraid of what I might say or do. We're just interested in values and so forth. So malnutrition has been a problem in some of them. Cardiac disease has been a common problem. Lonesome George, that died in the Galapagos, part of his problem was a cardiac problem. And so we don't know what that role plays in terms of nutrition or long-term health or death, either way. But these guys are dying in their late teens. These are animals that live countless decades, sometimes 80 or 100 years. My own animal is 75, 80 years old that I have, my big female. So this is an example of taking a blood sample from an adult female where she slipped kind of on her side, somebody's supporting her, and I've got the tail in my left hand angled towards the left there, and I've got the syringe getting a blood sample from the dorsal tail vein, which works pretty nicely if they cooperate. It can take a number of sticks, but you can get pretty good at it. Here's a couple animals, and you can see the swelling there that has been either thought to be thyroid or thymus. One of the problems we may have, this may be a syndrome that's got multifactorial things going on, because if it's thymic hyperplasia and you've got swelling of the rear legs, I have a hard problem believing the thymus is affecting the rear legs, but it could be affecting that area there. 2 more animals with the same kind of thing, swelling up around the neck. Sometimes these are relatively firm nodules. Here's a hind leg swelling of an animal. That's not thymus. It could be thyroid, could be cardiac, could be something else we don't know about. Here's a published case Fred Fry sent me a copy of. This is published, a picture of a red ear slider. Red ear sliders are good for everything, aren't they? All kinds of diseases, all kinds of problems, and they're weeds. They get everywhere. But there's a confirmed case of hypothyroidism with myxedema in a red ear slider from years ago. Here's a normal female. Look at that neck. Look at the lack of swelling in the arm and leg insertions. So we got a bunch of blood samples. We actually got samples from 46 animals across the country in the southern U.S. And we looked at females with swelling of their limbs and necks, females without, males with, and males without. Now, I just got these values in the last month or so, so if Mark is here, no, we don't have statistics yet, but I'm going to have you help me figure that all out. But what I've done in this graph here, I've put the ranges in a graph up and down, line up and down, and the average is the little star in the middle. And I think you can look at that and see that I'm not really convinced at this point that the T4 value is showing me a cause for swellings in Galapagos tortoises. Now, again, I haven't done statistics, but it sure doesn't look like it visually, does it, at that point? Okay. This one's dead. Look at the swelling this one had. Those two are both dead. I wasn't able to get samples from those. So on the other publications who have looked at this in Galapagos tortoises, Di Gonzalo and West, that group, they had some animals, they had 5 animals, and they had T4 values that ranged between 0.37 and 2.06. Norton and Jacobson had a clinically hypothyroid animal. Their normals were between 1.08 and 1.54. And then Fleming and Hurd, who actually did some biopsies of the necks of some animals that came up with the diagnosis of thymic hyperplasia in those animals. Their normal values for some animals were between 0.55 and 1.10. So it's hard to get normal values for T4s that agree on Galapagos tortoises. Okay, so their paper, they had 3 unknown sexes to 10 years old. They had myxedema, and the mean for theirs was 0.81. Norton and Jacobson had an adult male with swollen forelimbs. He was anoretic and lethargic, and his T4 was 0.29 compared to their normal 1.08 to 1.54. Fleming's cases, their normals were way down at 0.55 and 0.57, but look at the T4s in the affected animals that had the thymic problem, presumed thymic problem, quite a bit higher. If we looked at the 46 animals we took, they're all from different herds. Now, everybody calls a herd anything more than 1 animal. Most of these people have between 3 and 5 animals. One group I sampled that mine are in has 9 animals. So none of them are big samples at any one place. But if you compare what they've got in terms of husbandry, they're all eating hay, produce, cactus. Most have some access to grass for grazing. They're on dirt and grass with some trees and cactus overhead for shade. And they all have some sort of heat from the winter. And they were located all the way from California to Florida in southern part of the U.S. is where we were able to get samples from. So we had females with and without swelling and males with and without swelling. We had mostly females because the males are kind of hard to find. Most people that have these guys, there's about 3 or 4 females per male. Males are not very common in captivity, believe it or not, for whatever reason. We had a couple that were as young as 2 years, but most of them are older, a couple up in the 80-year-old age. And they were all privately kept. Our range in all these animals was between 0.02 to 1.06 micrograms per deciliter. So if we look at a quick bar graph type of thing, this just shows the low and high values for the normals for these different studies. And there's quite a bit of difference there. So I'm not quite sure what the normal is yet. One problem with ours is we have 3 animals we have to retest because they don't agree with everything else. Ours is being tested at the University of Texas Endocrine Lab. And in the future, we're taking the same samples. We're awaiting T3 results, which they're also running for ours. They're also running concurrent iodines from the same samples. We hope in the future to find a way to get some vitamin mineral values out of these, but it may not happen. Immunology would be nice. I have a board-certified cardiologist who recently moved to Phoenix, and on his days off, when they coincide with mine, we're going to try and do some cardiac echoes on some of these guys, starting with small ones to see if, remember, when we can do an echo on their hearts, and if we see any cardiac diseases, we can pick up that way or not. We have financial limits because Wendy's a private person. She's a horse breeder and tortoise breeder. She's funded all this stuff herself. So all the money that paid for all this is all out of her pocket. I provided the veterinary services and the syringes and blood tubes and stuff like that. She paid for all that. So yes, there's limits. So ideally, I would like to have a CBC and a profile each time. I'd like to compare spring and summer, that kind of stuff. It's not going to happen unless we get some funding somewhere. So I would like to say, if anybody out there is a vet who has Galapagos tortoises owned by a client you're taking care of, would you please talk to me? I'd like to talk to you about getting some samples and so forth. So anyway, There's my Galapagos tortoise on the left-hand side. That's Elizabeth. She was acquired in a market for sale for meat in Ecuador in 1940. We've tracked her back that far, and there's Wendy and her group of tortoises. So mine goes back quite a ways. That's why it's such a shame to see animals dying of the same size when they're in their teens. They don't grow that fast in the wild. They really don't. Something's wrong there. That's it for that.